Berg.
Risk and reward. Big tech could bolster the sagging economy. But what happens if those big social media platforms just get too big? Well, in the studio with us this morning, the Tech Secretary, Peter Kyle, the government's tech chief, if you like, and alongside him, the Shadow Chancellor, Mel Stride. We're going to be talking about the big ideas behind all of this. But as human beings, it affects us so much. How much time do you both spend on your phones, Peter?
Probably too much, but not nearly as much as people I know.
Well, that gets you off the hook then. What about you, Mel? How long do you
Far too much, Laura. And I feel a New Year's resolution coming. Actually, maybe a bit less time on the phone.
Okay.
Would be a good idea, particularly when the family's together. I think that's the thing.
Put those phones
It gets
down.
in the way of family time, doesn't it?
Well, put the phone down, concentrate on what's happening on the telly. We'll be with both of you a bit later in the programme. And in the home of the tech companies, California, of course, the wildfires still burn. We'll ask this morning, can the devastated city of Los Angeles return to its former glory?
I know that we'll come back. That's not a concern, I don't think, for anyone. We are so resilient. I mean, the city, but the American resilience is unmatched, in my opinion.
Morning. Joining you and me at the desk for the next hour, historian and cultural powerhouse, Simon Schama, the most senior elected Conservative in the country in office at the moment, Lord Houchin, Ben, the Mayor of Teesside, and Tanni Grey-Thompson, another member of the House of Lords and multi-gold medal winner. Welcome to you all this Sunday. Let's go straight then to what's making the news. Here at the BBC, we're leading on what's happening in Los Angeles. These are the latest pictures of what's happening overnight in LA, where firefighters are battling desperately to contain the largest of the wildfires. At least 16 people have already died, and sadly those numbers are expected to increase. Thousands and thousands of homes have been completely destroyed, and we'll talk about this more later in the programme. The papers, though, have a mixed bag today. The Sunday Telegraph splashes on Rachel Reeves' promise to root out waste to try to save money. She's on her trip to China. Nigel Farage was with us last week, but the Sunday Mirror brands him 9 jobs Nigel this morning, revealing just how many outside jobs he has outside Parliament, including the cash he makes from posting on social media sites. The Mail on Sunday claims that Dominic Cummings, remember him, is in cahoots with Elon Musk. And The Observer leads with its interview with Peter Kyle, who's with us as well. He's told them the online laws are not up for negotiation. So there's a lot around, but the three of you this morning, we're going to try and focus on the real tension between making the most of technology and the dilemmas that it brings us to. Tanni, are you concerned about the direction that technology has taken?
I am. So I worked on the edges of the online safety bill, and that was already out of date by the time that we worked on it. So now with, Facebook, other, big organisations saying they're going to relax a lot of the rules, I'm really worried, because it's an amazing power for good, but the ability to spread misinformation really, really concerns me.
And Ben, I mean, it was a big effort for the last government, the Conservatives in power, actually to finally get the UK rules onto the statute book. But do you agree with Tanni, it's already out of date?
Well, I think there are two things when we talk about this. One is the social media side. The other bit is the new technology side. And the UK government, for many years, took the view that we wanted to try and relax regulation as much as possible, because that would then focus the investment in the UK. And the Americans did the same thing. What we're looking forward to when we look at AI is, do we want to be part of that race? The Europeans have decided, no, they're going to heavily regulate it. I think the Americans are going to be on the other side of that and not regulate it. Do we want to capture some of that pie? But obviously there are pluses and minuses to no regulation and that kind of Wild West that we saw with social media over the last 10 years.
And do you think, though, that the rules have been changing, like the ground has been shifting in recent days?
I think it has, but I also think that, for example, social media, I think one of the most simple things to do in social media, now it's established, right? Your Twitters and your Facebooks, etc., would be to treat them in the same way that we treat the rest of the media and have them as a publisher. And actually, I don't think you then need an online safety bill, because there are lots of regulation, as you well know, Laura, around the media.
I well know,
but actually social media platforms are not subject to.
And they always, though, Simon, fought the notion that they were publishers, didn't they? I mean, how do you see this dilemma? Because it is risk and reward.
Yeah, well, living in America, actually, it goes back to the heart of an old, deep American issue, the relationship between profit and the public good. That goes way back. I mean, it goes back to the era of the muckrakers at the beginning of the progressive period in the early 20th century. Yeah. And there was always kind of balance in American history between the fast and big buck and some general sense of what was proper for the Commonwealth. Now, if you look at those apocalyptic scenes that we just saw, you know, climate change laughs at technology, really. It doesn't prevent horrible misinformation being put out, really, about what has actually caused the wildfires. Donald Trump's rather, you know, tragi-comic obsession that raking the forest floor would have prevented this, when, in fact, the epicenter of the fires are canyons. Hello, Donald, done a bit of geography. We know you haven't done any history. It's almost impossible to do it, but social media, and particularly the awful Rubicon crossed by Mark Zuckerberg, in which independent fact-checking is no longer a concern, will make preposterous, feel-good sense of actually the world should be full of high-tech cuddles replace alarm bells. That is really a terrible thing.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? As we get going in 2025, it so often feels that everything is kind of connected and woven together, whatever issue you touch on. And the dilemmas here are pretty dramatic. The government here says it wants to protect us from the worst excesses of the online world. But as Ben was suggesting, it needs the prosperity that new industries can offer. Our economy is not in great shape, in trouble. The Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, has been in China just as the pound has been falling, and it's become more expensive for the government to borrow, which it does, than it has been for 16 years. Now, if that continues, the Chancellor would have less cash to spend. She might then need to cut or even to tax more. So maybe advancing artificial intelligence could help us pay our way. Peter Kyle, the government's tech boss, if you like, is with us today. And we're going to talk about a lot of these issues, and they're all connected, but also let's try and talk about them in clear ways. So let's start off with this notion of advanced technology, artificial intelligence. You're saying this week we have to make the most of this as a country, and you want to do that as a government. But can you give us some practical examples of what you think AI could do for us that it's not currently doing?
Well, the key thing is that AI is going to transform our economy and society. If we get it right, it means that our innate potential as individuals, particularly people with learning disabilities and neurological challenges, will be able to explore their potential in ways that have never happened before. So it'll have a profound impact on teaching and learning. In health, because this is a general purpose technology, so this isn't one specific technology. So even in health, AI will transform the ability for scanning to become more precise, swifter, and able to detect very early patterns, so therefore get to disease, particularly cancer, before it gets to an untreatable stage or a very difficult to treat stage. And that same technology will be making sure that doctors and all of the interactions doctors have are more productive, they're swifter and they're more accurate, more time with patients, less time filling out forms. This is one technology that will be applied across the economy and society. Now, this could just wash across our country and society in a way that government just sits back and lets it happen. That's not what I went into this for and went into politics for. If we get this right, we will be able to be in the driving seat of it, creating the innovation. Therefore, the wealth that's created from creating the technology stays in our country and contributes to our economic growth and prosperity as a country. And the technology that comes out the other end benefits everyone from every part of the country equally, and isn't just a preserve of those people with privilege and affluence.
You've mentioned there health, and you also mentioned education and learning, and you are suggesting that teachers should use more of this kind of tech, artificial intelligence, to plan lessons. But the technology still gets things wrong. Should we be trusting it in schools? Should we be trusting it in hospitals?
Safety and protection and making sure that where there are biases, they are dealt with, has to be the first step. We have to make sure that people are protected. That's the point of safety. But we also need to make sure people feel safe. Now, the purpose of that is, if they feel safe, they will embrace the technology. If people are fearful of technology, they won't.
But just as an example, in the last couple of weeks, Apple, you don't need me to tell you how huge and powerful and influential Apple is. Apple's AI-generated news sent completely false, incorrect headlines to millions of people on more than one occasion. Now, if that's the case, is getting things like that wrong, are we really ready to say, yeah, bring it into our public realm, bring it into our public services, bring it more into our lives, in our schools and hospitals?
And this is always the trade-off we have with fast-moving technology and trying to embrace and capture it. I mean, so most people now know ChatGPT and the journey that ChatGPT, when it first was released, nobody took it seriously. Then suddenly, overnight, everybody started taking it seriously. Now, we've been developing a tool using the company OpenAI who does ChatGPT, so that gov.uk, which has 700,000 web pages behind it, can be far more easily accessible for people. Now, the civil servants...
the point is, it's still making mistakes.
No,
I mean, there are other examples here. Is it really at a stage where this technology is ready to be embraced in the way that you want it to be in public services, in all our lives?
Well, in the example, because I'm talking about for government, now most of these things we're talking about outside. Now, in government, I want to make sure that technology is put to good for the public use. So we've been using a model on government data within all those web pages. But we know it will make mistakes. We have to test it absolutely rigorously as much as we possibly can. And we went through the same process of allowing the public to come in and do what's called beta testing for it. I didn't run away from this. I personally headed it up because we need to understand that with technology, we have to make sure we go through the process of innovation and then safety and then deployment. And where there are issues that come up to it, that we address them very quickly and it leads to better services. But when it comes to the critical data, then we will be absolutely careful. We will be safety will be there at the outset, and we'll be very, very cautious. There are different uses of it within government, and where it comes to the use of careful and sensitive data, we will always make sure that it has the very, very highest level of security, and we will always explain to the public how we use it. Transparency of algorithms and data use will always be very public, and we will never, ever change the laws on data protection, so that people need to make sure that their data and understand their data is protected.
Let's talk, though, about a practical example. I mean, is it OK for kids to use ChatGPT to do their homework?
Actually, with supervision and used in the right way, then yes, because ChatGPT and the AI technology that's using language is already being used across the economy. So as long as it's
supervision, because I'm sure there are parents and teachers watching and kids watching who think, well, they can stick something into ChatGPT, come up with a bit of work, hand it in. Is that OK?
But Laura, I'm of an age when I remember this conversation about calculators. You know, so we need to make sure that kids and young people are learning how to use this technology and integrate it into their learning development, because there are kids with real talents, outlier talents. And using ChatGPT and other AI assistants could really turbocharge and give them a challenge they're not getting in other places. And in the same classroom, you could have kids with neurological barriers to learning that could have their innate barriers overcome and assisted with in the same classroom. So we need to help people use this, but it should never be a replacement for the expertise of teaching. That's the key thing we need to get right.
It's interesting, you're really emphasising the safety that you want to make sure is there this morning. But actually, your department has said officially, the press release you put out overnight, said there's been an overbearing focus on safety. And you accused the previous government of missing opportunities because they were worrying too much about safety. Can you give us a specific example of what the previous government worried too much about and the opportunity that was lost?
Well, safety is the first step. It is the crucial step. It is the unignorable step, but it's not the only step. And with the previous government, it was the only step. The purpose of safety is that people are protected.
But what specifically? Can you give us an example? Because you're accusing the former government of being overbearing on safety. I'm not sure that many of Rishi Sunak's colleagues would agree about that. He sat on a platform with Elon Musk and talked about the virtues of AI.
What they missed out on was the investment potential that can come from reconfiguring our infrastructure. Part of our plan for change is to get the infrastructure in house building, in energy, and yes, in digital infrastructure, which we will now sit alongside the importance of water and electricity to the future of our country, our health and well-being.
I was going to ask you about that, because a lot of people in this debate actually say, you know what, this is a big climate change issue too, because huge data centres are required. They need lots of energy, they need lots of water. How are you going to mitigate that? Well,
as part of our plan for change, we were announcing the AI Opportunities Action Plan. This is about, now we've got safety right, we can then focus on opportunities. So a whole range of measures, which will include announcements tomorrow by the Prime Minister on how we bring the strategic challenge of AI will pose into the strategic planning of energy going into the future. Once we've done that, we can get the infrastructure right. We will attract billions of pounds worth of investment, billions. That investment is into these data centres, which are factories for AI. This will create thousands and thousands of jobs, which are engineering jobs. They are building and construction jobs. They are also data jobs and programming jobs. So right across the board.
And when it comes to the economy, I mean, if you look at what's happened in recent days, the cost of borrowing for the government hitting 16-year highs, the pound on the slide, I mean, it's all gone a bit wrong, isn't it?
Well, at the last investment summit, we saw £24 billion of investment being pledged into AI-related industries in this country.
But the markets this week have given a verdict on the UK government's decisions, and they're not very impressed.
Well, if you put the market movement when it comes to gilts, for example, alongside other international countries, in particular America, you see very similar trends. But the way we're going to get out of this, because I don't accept the premise that we have to be stuck in the cul-de-sac that the Tories drove us into for the last 14 years, where it's high tax, low growth, and there's no alternative but to tax or cut.
The financial markets have made specific judgments about the UK and specific judgments about the decisions you've made as a government in the last 6 months. It's not all about the inheritance that you got, it's about the decisions that Rachel Reeves has made, and they don't look impressed.
We've already seen regulatory changes, because I've brought the Office of Regulatory Innovation into my department. It's up and running. We've seen a house building programme now underway and the planning laws going through. We see an investment programme into digital infrastructure going forward. You're going to see the first stages of that tomorrow. In the coming weeks, you're going to see other announcements about how citizens are going to be empowered through technology, how we're going to make sure everybody is included in the technology that unfolds. But when we get the infrastructure right, think what we can build on top of it. So this is what we're doing at this point in the government, building the infrastructure, whether house building, whether it's energy and the transition. AI will also contribute to solving some of the energy challenges as well as posing energy challenges. And this is why it's a sophisticated challenge that we're determined to get right.
OK, let's stick with tech, because you know well how concerned lots of people watching are about social media, and particularly how it affects young people. Now, viewers will remember there are new laws to try to combat the worst excesses, the Online Safety Act. But some families who've been caught up in tragic cases just do not think this has gone far enough. They think there needs to be additional protection. And yesterday we spoke to Ian Russell, who everyone will remember his daughter Molly took her own life after seeing distressing content online. I want you to listen to Ian's comments, what he told us yesterday, and his direct appeal to the Prime Minister.
There's been a complete U-turn. And one announcement this week, the announcement that Mark Zuckerberg made in particular, just leads me to believe that Meta is turning its platforms back towards the platforms that Molly saw in the last months of her life. I'm sure Keir as a father protects his children from online dangers as much as any individual can. But as a Prime Minister, he needs to really back online safety and move forward so that the UK is the safest place in the world to be online, and children, when they're there in the future, don't face the dangers they're facing today.
Now, in the new rules that have been put forward, there are no specific measures around self-harm content. There are no specific measures around live streaming. It's unclear about chatbots, which are becoming a huge thing online. There's nothing around private messaging. So do you really think that the new rules match the scale of the problem? Because people like Ian Russell, who spent years campaigning for this, think they fall far short.
Firstly, let me say I met Ian in opposition. I've met Ian and the victim community in the first fortnight of being appointed Secretary of State, and I've met them since to engage with them. I want to bring their voice and give and respond to the challenges that they put to us, because their experiences must be heard. But sitting alongside that is a very personal commitment to making sure that everybody, particularly people with vulnerabilities, and every child is vulnerable.
So he's telling you the rules don't protect people enough.
So we've already acted. There are more powers coming online. It is already, and by March it will be enforceable, that any illegal content must be removed. Later next year, all platforms and content creators must make sure that the content they're creating and publishing is appropriate for the age of the person who is viewing it. If not, there will be very, very strict enforcement rules. Now, in the period since I came in, I've issued a statement of strategic intent, which I promised the victims I would do, and the previous administration didn't. That has insisted to Ofcom that they spend more time and more focus and use their powers more assertively when it comes to keeping children safe online.
The point is that Ian Russell, who, for the worst possible reason, has become an absolute expert in all of this codes, he knows them inside out, and he wants this act to work. Campaigners like him have identified clear loopholes in the rules. They don't think it goes far enough. So are you open to tightening them up?
I'm constantly reviewing them. I have to allow the new measures, because I came into office at a point where the legislation had passed but hadn't been implemented. I want to focus on getting all of the powers I can have implemented, and that will happen in the course of this year. I am very open-minded, and I've said publicly that we will have to legislate into the future again. I think we have to get, I'll be honest about this, we can't just wait every decade or so and do a big bang of online harm legislation and also other bits of technological legislation. We need to get Parliament more into the cycle of updating the law and making sure, because things like deep fakes, for example, come down the line and in 3 months they are developed, designed, deployed, and they're impacting society in ways we need to adjust to.
She worked on the bill. She said it's already out of date, but isn't also the point that Ian makes this morning is that the game has changed here. The whole way the rules were designed in the UK was based on the platforms playing ball. It was based on them increasing the level of safety. And this week we've heard Mark Zuckerberg get rid of fact-checking in the US. We all know what Elon Musk has been up to on his own platform, posting things that are inflammatory and misleading about your government ministers. They've changed the game, haven't they?
Let me be really clear about this. There is one thing that has not changed, and that is the law of this land and the determination of this government to keep everybody safe and have a safe experience, to have safety built in at the outset so that people can safely explore the potential of online activity.
But do you think that the platforms are changing the game? I mean, Mark Zuckerberg, who is the man who controls the platforms that provide lots of people in this country, billions of people around the world, with the information that they see every day. What did you think when you heard him say we're ditching fact-checking?
Well, that was an American statement for the American service users. That was not a global thing.
Global. I mean, he said we'll catch less bad stuff. Yeah. What did you think?
Forgive me, Laura, I'm not trying to justify anything here, but I did listen to the entire statement. Twice he mentioned the need to take down illegal activity. Again, he mentioned the need to do more to keep children safe online. He was trying to balance the challenge of free speech with taking down illegal content.
But he said, I think viewers will be really interested. You're in charge of this for our nation's young people, children, vulnerable, and all of us as adults who, as you two at the top said, spend too much time on your phones. When you heard Mark Zuckerberg say, we'll catch less bad stuff, what did you think? That
the law isn't changing. And let me be really clear on this. Access to the British society and economy is a privilege. It is not a right. If you come and operate in this country, you abide to the law. The law says illegal content must be taken down. The law says on messaging that all developing technology must be used in order to avoid even end-to-end encrypted being used to supply and deploy illegal content.
But the fact here, Peter Kyle, as you know, is much of the concern here is not about content that might be against the law. It's about content that might be harmful to people seeing it, even if it's not illegal. That was the whole big the big debate about the Online Safety Act, was things that were known as legal but harmful. So I really do think people would like to know what went through your mind when you heard Mark Zuckerberg say, we'll catch less bad stuff.
OK, look, the frustration I have is that the bill was conceived with a whole set of principles, including taking down illegal, but also tackling the area where the volume of interaction could have a negative impact, legal but harmful. Kemi Badenoch, when she was running for leader, at that exact point the bill was passing through Parliament, said that this is legislating for hurt feelings. That entire bit of the bill was taken out. So I've inherited a landscape where we have a very uneven, unsatisfactory legislative settlement, but there are some very good powers coming through. There are very good powers on statute. I've already used the powers to tackle intimate image abuse. I've already used the powers to tackle deepfakes, another piece of legislation going through in the coming months. I'm using the powers assertively to tackle the emerging threats and safety concerns. Our overall landscape makes sure that illegal content must be taken down, but I also have powers which I'm using to make sure that where there is harm, that we can tackle that harm, but particularly in the coming months, I will have the power and Ofcom will have the power to make sure that platforms only provide content that is suitable for the age of the person viewing it. And the sanctions that can come into force if they don't are very, very strident. In fact, the most strident in the world. Okay. This is a good start. The world of tech is fast moving. I am trying to keep up, but safety will always be number one so that we can safely explore all the opportunities technology provides. And it is, as you've explained, a real dilemma for politicians trying to keep up here. I must also, as you're here, ask you about your colleague, Tulip Siddiq. She's a Treasury Minister. She's been accused of being connected to corruption of her aunt's government. She's the now deposed leader in Bangladesh, Sheikh Hasina. Tulip Siddiq has denied doing anything wrong, and she's being investigated by the independent parliamentary authorities. But Kemi Badenoch says she should be sacked. Her position's not tenable, should she? Tulip has referred herself to the authorities to be investigated. That needs to be completed. But the thing you can guarantee with this government and Keir Starmer as Prime Minister is he will abide to the outcome of that inquiry. So if Laurie Magnus finds she's erred, she'll be out? Keir has said numerous times he has respect for these institutions. He has given them more independence. He has given them more authority to do their own inquiries. I'm pretty sure that he will adhere to what comes out. Compare that to what happened with Boris Johnson and Priti Patel, where she was found guilty of breaking the code. Kemi Badenoch said nothing about that, and she carried on with no sanction whatsoever. This is a different era, different leadership, and I think you'll see the outcomes of inquiries like this and the fruits being borne in the way that we govern this country. OK, we will see what happens, Peter Kyle. Thank you so much. Great to have you with us in the studio. I know it's a busy week for you, and everybody will be hearing more about the plans for technology in the government in the coming days. Well, of course, it's your show too, so you can use that technology to tell us what you think of what's been going on this morning. Send us an email, kuenssberg@bbc.co.uk, or if you're social media inclined, all the information is there for you on the screen. And I still haven't learned the WhatsApp number off by heart one of these days. Simon, you're sitting there with your arms folded. Oh, yeah, I know. What's that all about?
It's, you know, safety is an incredibly important issue, obviously, no one would deny that. But you can end up, when you're worrying about the effects, for example, of less bad stuff and that kind of thing, have too narrow a definition of safety, I think. I mean, what we're actually facing, particularly, I think, with the second coming of Donald Trump, is a kind of war on knowledge, is the replacement of fact by opinion. You know, the Earth is round, well, that's just your opinion. Vaccines cause autism, no, it's been demonstrably scientifically proved that they don't, no, that's just your opinion. And this, in a kind of larger cultural, educational sense, is an incredible threat, I think, actually. Once we suppose it's a kind of, you know, a field for all comers to decide what's true and what's not, there's a huge problem, not least for democracy, but I think for free cultures anyway. Ben, what did you think of what Peter had to say on all this? I mean, it is a dilemma for politicians to get that balance right, but how do you think the government is pursuing it?
Again, I think we're going back to what I said previously. There's the two separate conversations. If you talk about AI, I agree with the Minister. The opportunities from AI are incredible. I mean, there are conversations with in the healthcare sector, for instance, where they genuinely believe that if AI continues as it is, we could see cancer completely cured within the next 10 years because of the modelling that it can provide, the speed with which it can develop those types of those models. Social media is a different thing, and I slightly push back a little bit, Laura, where you say, you know, the rules have changed. I mean, at the same time, there is also an argument, which is fair, that says, you know what, the fact checkers haven't been great. You know, lots of mainstream media organisations, not in the UK, but more so in America, you know, actively did cover up things like President Biden's mental decline. And what Zuckerberg is trying to do is move towards X, which is more community notes. Now, neither are perfect. This is the problem. There is no black and white answer to this. There's no right or wrong. And they're businesses at the end of the day as well. They're not public organisations that are representing the public, but they have such access to all of our lives. On the point about the economics of artificial intelligence, though, so in your part of the world, obviously you're trying to drum up business all the time for a Teesside. Do you see opportunities? You know, do you want the government to come knocking and say, can we build a big data centre in your part of the world? Well, I don't think it's for government to, well, I'd like to think it's not for government to dictate where these investments go, but there are conversations ongoing around data centres coming to the UK, and there may or may not be discussions going on about Teesside. So there are huge local opportunities in that. But again, one of the things... Sounds like there are. There may or may not when a politician says that. one of the interesting things, I suppose, as you go down the line, though, and this is why they went back to where they did with social media by not regulating it at the beginning, is if you have, for example, these large-scale data centres based in the UK, where these companies are spending, you know, upwards of $10 billion to build them each, then all of a sudden they're there. That physical infrastructure exists in the UK. So then you could argue you have more of a hook to be able to have that conversation with that company, be able to sculpt the regulation. If we turn around and say on day one, we're going to put loads of restrictions in place, those companies are going to say, we're not coming to the UK, we'll stay in the US because they're not going to Europe either. The US will then dictate the regulatory environment because these are internationally mobile things, right? The media on X, Elon Musk might be sat in Mar-a-Lago, but we're getting on our phones in the UK. So there is this kind of middle ground I think we have to find. Where I personally think we need to get this investment here, and then over time as it develops, you've got to keep a close eye on it. And I think you then kind of look at where it's gone well, where it's gone badly, and that's ultimately the role of the state, where it gets involved around the edges on regulation.
And how hard, though, Tanny, do you think it is as a legislator? I mean, it was interesting at the beginning, you said you felt that the bill about safety is already out of date. But as a legislator, looking at trying to keep up with technology, how tricky is it?
Part of the issue is we operate in silos. So, yes, I use technology a lot, and I think it can be really powerful. But how you balance, right, we need to teach young people how to use AI, but we need to protect them from some of the ills of social media. We have a digital divide. There are families who can't afford fast-speed internet, who can't afford the equipment. Actually, will education of our children keep up with this? Because actually, should we be testing and examining our children in the way we've done for goodness knows how long? Actually, do exams have the same value? Does homework have the same value? Does coursework have the same value? We've got a whole bunch of young people, because of COVID, who've still, at university, not sat in lecture halls, have not done an exam. But then if you want to get onto a graduate programme, you have to do an exam. So I think we need to look at how we educate our children. And, just by fluke, we happen to be here together. I live on Teesside. At one point, ICI employed 30,000 plus people on Teesside. That has all changed in the last 25 years. So, AI will give us more jobs, but what jobs? How many more cafes and nail bars do we need? Actually, where are the real jobs? And the government want to get people into work, but where are those jobs to make it happen?
And even in this digital world as well, you're finding, even with existing AI possibilities, that actually you don't really need coding anymore. Everybody said 5 years ago, the government said, we're going to train loads of coders, that's the future. And all of a sudden, technology comes along and completely destroys that again. Actually, you can type in the English language, I want you to produce this programme. And if you know what you're doing, then that programme can be produced. You don't need coders anymore. So you also have to be careful that the state can't, so kind of that picking that winners and losers thing, right? The technology is always going to evolve, and you always have to kind of wrap your arms around it and try and guide rather than dictate.
Simon, as a historian, I mean, what do you think about ChatGPT coming to? I don't think it could ever replace Simon Sharma, but is it coming to eat your lunch?
But definitely should. It's undoubtedly, a quantum leap kind of change socially and culturally and intellectually, everywhere you can think about it. And we're still in infancy. Listening to our friends here, I'm just wondering whether you think actually there's enough explicit discussion, for example, about how schools and educational curricula, as well as the sort of scary business, I so agree with you about, there's fine talk about the creation of jobs, but exactly which jobs remains so frighteningly unknown. And do you think there's enough explicit, or is it too, politically dynamite? Worrying.
Too difficult to talk about, Tanny?
Yeah, exactly.
I think we're probably too far away from being able to join those things together. Every time we talk about curriculum change, that still feels sort of quite out of date and not to where we currently need to be. So, we need to get that in a much better position.
And it's a good thought of us to talk about it more in the year, as we'll no doubt talk about education more in the studio as the months proceed. Tanny, as you're here, you're one of the best-known voices in the campaign against assisted dying. Just before Christmas, we had some very powerful conversations around the table about the pros and cons. The bill that's been put forward is going into what's called the committee stage in Parliament. What are you seeking to achieve in the next couple of months as that proceeds?
So partly as a member of the House of Lords, we have to let the Commons run through their process. I do have concerns about the committee stage in terms of how quickly they're going to try and get it through. I don't think something like this, which fundamentally changes our relationships with society, should be a private member's bill.
And so it means it's just put forward by one MP.
Yeah, and it's actually the ability to the committee to actually make changes and to make meaningful amendments, I think is a problem. You know, a lot of people argue for choice, and you know, that's a very valid argument. But when you give some people choice, you remove it from others in this instant. And I'm massively concerned that disabled people, especially when we're talking about the economy, you know, the government potentially taking $3 billion out of the welfare budget, everything else that's, you know, not going great at the moment. Disabled people will feel that they have no other choice but to end their lives if this gets onto the statute books.
OK, well, no doubt we'll talk about that more in the weeks to come. We're about to talk to Mel Stride, the Shadow Chancellor, a very senior member of Kemi Badenoch's team. Ben, the last time you were here, you told us you were worried that if Kemi Badenoch's team basically sort of didn't get their act together a bit, they'd leave a vacuum for Nigel Farage. Do you think that's happened in the last month or so?
I think what we're seeing, and I think we talked about this last time, is that historically, where the Labour Party has done poorly, naturally support has kind of then leaked over to the Conservative Party and vice versa. But I think post-Brexit, with obviously the changes on voting and the Red Wall, in the 2024 election, I think that was the opposite, in effect, in the Shires, in the South and the South East. I think things are very different. And what we're actually seeing in the polls is because people still don't trust the Conservative Party, because we've got a big journey to go on to rebuild that credibility, which, let's be honest, very few people see the Conservative Party credible as a result of the 2024 election. It has been difficult. And who's benefited? I mean, the Labour Party are doing a terrible job at the moment in broad terms, and Reform are, by default, benefiting from that opportunity. Now, I would say as well, this week's been a little bit better. Again, largely because the Labour Party keeps shooting themselves in the foot, and actually Kemi is starting to get across on things like grooming gangs. The economy, I think, is going to continue to be a problem for this government, where we have the fantastic Mel Stride as Shadow Chancellor, who will be able to hold this government to account. We've just got to be careful, because if we don't get our act together quickly, we could be in the May elections, we could see Reform in significant seats, and all of a sudden we're on the back foot. And 2 or 3 years can go by very quickly, and all of a sudden we haven't built those foundations going into the next election.
Could they beat you in the local elections?
I'm not sure about that, but I think they could make significant gains. If you look at the by-elections that have happened since the election, we've performed better than everywhere else. What's been interesting is how well Reform have performed relative to Labour. So there'll be a significant force. There'll be a significant force in the local elections.
Wasn't a no. We will see. Well, let's put some of that to Ben Houchen, who Ben Houchen described as the fantastic Mel Stride, because whether or not it's on government debt or on gangs, you might have noticed that opposition politicians do seem to have gingered up a bit since the start of the year. This week they've been busy poking fun at the Chancellor for going AWOL on a planned trip to China, while the financial markets were having a wobble. Well, Mel Stride is with us, as you know by now. Let's start then with the economy. Now, you've spent this week claiming the government's responsible for damaging the economy. It's a bit rich coming from the party that had Liz Truss in charge when the markets blew up and the UK's credibility disappeared, isn't it?
So when this government came into office, we had the fastest growth in the G7. We had near record level of employment, near record low level of unemployment. We had seen real wages rising in each of 13 consecutive months, and we had brought inflation down from over 11% at its peak right the way down to bang on 2% target.
After an absolutely horrible
on the day of the general
record levels of
election.
Taxation.
So that was their inheritance.
Blowing up the economy.
No, what the real story here, Laura, is that the government said during the general election that they had no intention of jacking up taxes left, right and centre. They have done exactly the opposite, and they piled taxes onto businesses through the national insurance changes. That has led to an economic slowdown. They talked down the economy as soon as they came into office. That has dampened the animal spirits. We have now seen a fiscal splurge, which they're laying out in the first 2 years, which is pushing up inflationary pressures, which means interest rates being higher for longer, people's mortgages costing more. We're seeing unemployment rising. And what we're now seeing in the last 5 or 6 days is the markets beginning to lose confidence in this government's economic plan. And that is because they are not delivering growth. They're taking all the wrong decisions.
But I can almost hear people shouting at the telly. So I'll ask you again, isn't it a bit rich for you to be saying this when under Liz Truss, what happened, people's mortgages went up, the markets took an absolutely grisly view of what was happening in the UK. You were no fan of that either.
I was chair of the Treasury Select Committee at the time that happened, and I had plenty to say about it on the public record that people can have a look at. But the reality is that when this government took over, we had, as I said, the fastest growing.
What
has happened to growth now? Growth at the end of last year, the last figures we have, growth in 2 consecutive months has actually contracted. Now, the problem that means, combined with the spike in bond yields, is we're now spending billions of pounds servicing an ever-increasing national debt, which is money which is not going into our public services, for example.
And in a second, I want to ask you what you would do instead. But you've said yourself, as chair of the Treasury Select Committee, you had plenty of very critical things to say about Liz Truss. So I'll ask you again, isn't it actually just blatant opportunism to be trying to get this narrative going, suggesting that the government is responsible for an enormous market wobble and turmoil because of the decisions they've made, when Liz Truss had the effect with Kwasi Kwarteng on the markets a couple of years ago?
Look, whatever happened around the mini-budget is not the cause of business confidence falling through the floor at the moment. That is happening. We see that in all these PMI surveys because of the actions that this government has taken. The first thing they did when they came into office was to talk the economy down in order to pitch roll for reneging on the promises they made, particularly on tax and spending during the general election. They then ramped up all these taxes on business, which has had the consequences that I've set out. They're borrowing huge amounts of money, some of which is inflationary. And we're now in a position, as I say, where the cost of servicing our debt under this government, which is an additional 12 billion a year, you could actually employ 300,000 nurses for that amount of money. And Rachel Reeves may say, well, I've gone to China and I managed to get 120 million pounds per year additional injection into the UK economy. That's got to be set against £12 billion of additional payments simply to service our debt.
But it's also important for people to understand this is not an issue that is confined to the UK. Other countries like Germany have seen also their costs of borrowing go up. Aren't you misleading people by trying to suggest this is all about the UK government's decisions?
We've got the highest borrowing costs now in 27 years at the 30-year bond rate. At 10 years, it's about 16 in the last 16 years. And what you have to look at, Laura, is the spread with other countries.
But do you admit that other countries are experiencing similar issues?
Similar issues are happening across the globe, that is true, but we are distinctly an outlier. It is much, much worse here. In fact, the spread on bond yields between ourselves and Germany is the highest it's been in 30 years. That is the nature of the problem that we have.
So what would you do then if you were in Rachel Reeves' seat now? Would you cut spending, raise taxes, or change the rules on borrowing?
So I wouldn't have got here in the first place.
We
were very clear.
What would you do if you were there?
This leads to the kind of things that the government should have done, okay, is when we went into the last election, we were very clear in our manifesto, firstly, that we would make choices on tax that lent into growth, not dampening growth. Secondly, we made it very clear that productivity should lie right at the heart of any sustainable economic policy. And that is something this government has not done. So 14% for train drivers, those wage increases, 22% for junior doctors.
But what would you do now? Because you got battered in that election.
So the third thing, which touches on the area that the government should be urgently looking at as completely ducked, is welfare spending. So I was Secretary of State at Department of Work and Pensions, and I brought in reforms that were bringing in, you can see it in the OBR's scorecard, £5 billion worth of savings across the forecast period. Now, that is good in the sense that it's channeled into helping and getting people into work and off benefits. And it's also good fiscally because it gives you that extra firepower to meet the challenges that we're now facing.
Are you suggesting that everything should then come from a squeeze or changes to the welfare budget? And, you know, people will know Liz Kendall, who's now in charge of welfare, has sat in that chair and said that they will save money from welfare in a different way to you did. But is that what you're suggesting? All of the answer here is from a squeeze on welfare spending?
No, what I actually said was three things. I said we should have had a different approach to the economy that didn't tax the daylights out of businesses such that we've seen that dampening of the animal spirits, we've seen that dampening of growth. We should have had something from this government that was far more about productivity. You saw that in Jeremy Hunt's last budget, 3.4 billion aimed at the NHS and improving productivity, for example. And yes, we should definitely be looking at welfare. And we went into the last general election with a plan to save 12 billion from the welfare budget. Now, that is a huge amount of money that could actually be used, much better used, to reduce taxes on businesses and get the economy going. But the government, Laura, just very quickly, if I may finish, the government has talked about welfare, waffled on about it for a very long time, but they're not doing anything about it. They haven't even said they will commit to the precise reforms that I brought in, that the OBR has scored, that save that £5 billion across the next 5 years.
Now,
they're not even in a position of saying, we know how we're going to do that, let alone take the tough but necessary choices going forward.
Now, one of the criticisms that you've made of Rachel Reeves in recent days is that she shouldn't have gone to China, the second biggest economy in the world. But if you were the Chancellor, would you go? Because you'd be following in the footsteps of this lot, your former colleagues. You'd be following in the footsteps of, oh, look, there's David Cameron. He went off to China to go to meet leaders there. Oh, Theresa May went off to China as well. George Osborne there as Chancellor went, and Philip Hammond was the Conservative Chancellor who also went to China. So would you go to China?
They weren't going to China at a point that our economy was in significant distress. And it is completely wrong for the Chancellor at a point that we have this stress in the bond markets with the consequences that I've set out for people right up and down the country, their living standards, their businesses, their livelihoods and so on. The Chancellor should be here at her station, reassuring markets and trying to give some sense that this government gets the depth of the problem and it has some clear plans.
So as Chancellor,
because don't take my word for the fact that people don't have
planned
confidence.
visit to see the Chinese government.
Sorry.
If you were Chancellor, you would have ditched a planned visit to see the Chinese government and Chinese investors because of what was going on in the markets. It's a yes or no.
So
I
I would most definitely not be in Beijing or Shanghai at the moment talking to the Chinese cap in hand for some kind of deal, trade arrangements, etc., at a time that these kind of momentous things are happening around the UK economy. Okay. She needs to get a grip, and she should be here in order to do that.
Okay. Ben Houchen said that you were the fantastic Mel Stride.
The check is in the post, Laura.
But he said people still don't trust us. Few people see us as credible. Is he wrong?
So he is absolutely right, and the general election exemplifies this, that we have a huge mountain to climb. But we have the time to do it. There will not be a general. There will not.
To do it. It's Nigel Farage snapping at your heels.
There will not be a general election for probably another 4.5 years. We have absolutely got to regain the trust on a number of areas, including and most significantly the economy. I am absolutely confident that under Kemi's leadership, she has very clear direction. She knows what her Conservative principles are. That we will do the hard yards and that deep and thoughtful work to come up with the right policy platform that means that we can get back into political contention. Okay. But these things take time. We need to re-earn that respect from the electorate, and that's what we'll be doing over the coming months and years.
OK, well, we're hoping to hear from her herself in the coming weeks, but it's great to have you with us, Mel Stride, here in the studio with us, the Shadow Chancellor. Now then, there's been another night of unimaginable terror and heartbreak. That's how an LA official described last night as wildfires still burn out of control in the city. Hundreds of thousands of people have fled their homes. At least 16 people have died. A nightmare in the city of dreams. But what does this mean for Californians and the future of LA? Heard from two well-known Californian faces. Jerry Brown, who was governor for 16 years, and the star of real estate reality show Selling Sunset, Jason Oppenheim.
Since we offered our services for free, we've received dozens and dozens of calls from people who have lost their homes in the fires. And, you know, we're doing our best. It's all hands on deck right now. But it's really difficult because there are thousands of people who are displaced without places to stay. The hotels are overwhelmed, all the way down to Newport Beach and even into San Diego. You can't get a hotel room right now. And even unfortunately, and this is something that I want to discuss because I think it should be exposed, but we're having landlords taking advantage of the situation. I had a client, we sent him to a house that was asking $13,000 a month. He offered $20,000 a month, and he offered to pay 6 months up front. And the landlord said, no, I want $23,000 a month. You know, there are price gouging laws in California that are just being ignored right now. And this isn't the time to be taking advantage of situations. And it's also illegal to take advantage of a natural disaster.
So do you think that landlords might be not just profiting during this emergency, but actually breaking the law?
Absolutely, they are. I mean, I researched the law last night. You cannot charge more than 10% above pre-disaster market rates.
And it must be an incredibly difficult time for everyone who lives in that area. But our viewers are familiar with seeing you show people around the most exquisite, the most lavish, the most expensive properties in, you know, the city of dreams. What's it like for you to see some parts of Los Angeles in the state they're now in, reduced to ash and rubble?
I can't even put words to it. I never could have imagined that this would have happened here, and maybe that's naivety on my part, but communities like Altadena, very hardworking class areas, and these people really lost not just their homes, but their belongings, their clothes. Forget about the $50 to $100 billion of damage that's caused. It's emotional for everyone. I mean, I think everyone just has tears in their eyes all day long. Not literally from the smoke, but also just because it's emotional to see people struggling like this.
How do you think Los Angeles, City of the Angels, a place that is in many people's dreams, will be able to come back from such a terrible disaster?
I know that we'll come back. That's not a concern, I don't think, for anyone. We are so resilient. I mean, the city, but the American resilience is unmatched, in my opinion. And we'll rebuild, and we'll rebuild better with stronger foundations than ever before. And I mean that figuratively, but probably also literally. So I'm not worried about Los Angeles coming back, better and stronger. But at the same time, I hope that we can learn, difficult and important lessons about our priorities.
Okay, Jason, thank you so much for speaking to us today. Thank you for your time, and be safe.
Thank you so much.
Governor, it's been so alarming even watching these pictures from thousands of miles away. For you as a former governor of the state, it must have been terribly difficult to see what's been happening.
It's a horror, and it brings home just the danger that we live in. We're in such an affluent place and time that when nature acts up, and when we have these horrible fire events, or sometimes earthquake or flood, we realize the contingency, the uncertainty, and the risk that human beings have. We've come a long way into the modern era, but we're by no means free or immune to catastrophe. The southwest of the United States, which includes Nevada and Arizona and other places, they're a focal point for changing climate. To deal with climate change, they say is $6 trillion a year globally, $6 trillion. Now, there's one more cost, resilience. That's going to cost globally at least $1 trillion every year. We got to start paying now. And then we have to do something to reduce the fact that every year these heat-trapping gases are being emitted by human beings to the tune of 50 billion tons a year. And we're still going up. Now, when we start going down, we're still going to put 49 billion tons or 45 billion tons for as far as the eye can see. So, yes, we are in deep trouble all over the world.
Yet the man who'll be back in the White House a week tomorrow takes a very different view to you. You've dealt with Donald Trump. What would you say to him that the fires suggest he ought to do?
Nature is nature. Physics is physics. And not even Donald Trump, who's quite clever in many ways, can repeal the law of physics. And I would say in the next 4 years, we're going to see the reduction to absurdity of the proposition that climate change is a hoax, that it's moving slowly. Don't worry. All of that are going to be demonstrably absurd. And as that happens, I predict the climate activists, the scientists, people who are really seeing where we are and what's happening will get stronger, and the people will listen to them.
Donald Trump, though, has powerful allies, including Elon Musk, who have been circulating different versions of events of what's really happened. You had experience of dealing with Elon Musk as governor of California when you were in that role. How would you describe having to deal with him and what he's up to now?
We're going to go through a lot of soul searching about the role of money and about the role of money in the hands of the very few. This is a highly undemocratic aspect of our current economy and our current institutional arrangement. And it's also in the context now of anything goes in this world of free speech. Free speech was one thing at the time of Gladstone and Disraeli and Thomas Jefferson. It's quite another at the time of Trump and Elon Musk and all the others. So how are we going to regulate this digital flow of all manner of information, that can be completely false? So that's a real problem for free speech. It's still roiling the politics of America, and probably will the politics of the world. But somehow We can't live in a world where the distinction between truth and falsehood is no longer discernible. But that's the world we are entering.
Well, there'll be plenty of coverage across the BBC of the LA fires as they continue and firefighters continue to battle to bring it under control. And this comes, Ben, as President Trump, a week tomorrow, will be sworn back into the White House. We're almost at that point of the inauguration. He's such a controversial figure in this country, such a controversial figure in the US. But how do you think our politicians should deal with him? And how do you, as a politician, who presumably, you always want to bring investment to your area, how do you deal with Donald Trump?
Well, I've already written to President-elect Trump, trying to get him to come to Teesside on the state visit that he'll have, I think, later this year or next year. Because ultimately, America are our biggest single trading partner. We have a long historic relationship with the United States. They have a huge amount of opportunity to invest. If they can bring that investment and create jobs in the UK, we should absolutely be embracing that.
So you want Air Force One landing at Teesside Airport?
Well, the last time it happened was George Bush when he came to meet Tony Blair in Sedgefield. So it has happened before, so there is precedent for it. So it'd be great to have another precedent.
Well, it could have a stopover in American Greenland.
Yes, possibly. Well, even this morning, I mean, this is the effect that Trump has. Even this morning, Greenland are talking about negotiating on access to Arctic land. So, like I say, if we think we can sit here, stick our fingers in our ears, ridicule him and pretend that we shouldn't deal with the Americans or Trump, then those people really are in the wrong job if they're in government. We need to embrace it. We need to deal with it. And again, I think if you can get closer to the Americans, then again, the idea and something that Britain's always been good at over the centuries is shaping that international viewpoint and shaping, hopefully, the views of Donald Trump and this American administration.
Connie, will you watch the inauguration next week?
Yes, I will. I'm very conflicted. I struggle to respect Donald Trump as an individual, but he will be president and, very powerful, and we have to find a way of working with him. And if he comes to Parliament, I would love to listen to him in real life. OK. And Simon, your latest work, you're always bringing us exciting work. The Story of Us, which is on BBC Two at the moment, you're talking about the story of this country. But the story of this country is intertwined with the story of America, isn't it? How do you feel about next week? And I suspect this probably isn't going to be pretty.
No, I think I don't feel great about it, Laura. This will come as a great shock to you and everybody. And the reason I think actually there's been a lot of worry, and it's not entirely unjustified, about this being 4 years of quasi-authoritarian destruction of the guardrails of the American Constitution, actually, particularly because of the Supreme Court decision, which surprisingly not to allow the postponement of his sentencing suggests the Supreme Court isn't necessarily totally in his court. However, the real problem, I think, is a kind of capitalist anarchy, I have to say. Everything for Donald Trump is transactional business. Sorry?
I was going to say he was president, and then people wanted him back. His inauguration in 2017, after the 2016 election, was greeted with the same derision by some people who don't like his style. But in the end, American voters chose him another time.
Yes, but going forward, when, the man for whom deporting millions of immigrants is somehow going to transform American life, rubber meets the road. He hits reality. If you do that, it's very unlikely to happen for practical reasons, you instantly deprive intensive agriculture in California, among other places, of its labour. And lo and behold, together with targeted tariffs, you drive inflation up again. So there'll be this kind of catfight, actually, between practical capitalists in this administration and kind of wild-eyed capitalist utopians of the Elon Musk kind. At the heart of it, we have an unelected President Musk, actually, who presupposes, but from the fact that he's the richest man in the world, he wants to be governing not just the United States and the world. That's the future which is going to be tested.
We'll see if there is a week of 2025 when we don't mention Elon Musk. There hasn't been one so far, but it's been great to have you three with us this morning. Simon, Ben and Tani, thank you so much indeed for being with us. And thank you to you, most of all, of course, for watching wherever you are. I'll be on Sunday's newscast later with Paddy O'Connell. Of course, you can catch up on iPlayer as always. And as we've been discussing, this time next week, Donald Trump will be preparing to be sworn in again as president. The world already has been turning in his direction, whether it's tech, tariffs, or how traders are behaving on the mighty financial markets. Anything could happen. So tons to talk about next Sunday, same time, same place.